Welcome to the TechTruth podcast. I'm Carson here with Lambo. We're just two tech talent geeks bringing you the real talk from some of the most innovative IT leaders in the industry. We'll be sharing their journey, lessons learned, maybe a face palm or two. Today's guest is Chuck Koch, distinguished CIO known for their strategic prowess and leadership in information technology across various industries. Before stepping into their current position, they played a pivotal role in steering significant mergers and acquisitions, showcasing their expertise in navigating complex transactions and integrating technologies to drive organizational success. Their journey marked by impactful contributions from being a senior developer to leading IT strategists at national level embodies a blend of technical excellence and visionary leadership. Thanks for being here, Chuck.
Oh, appreciate it. Thanks for having me. That's quite the introduction.
Appreciate that. I try.
He does his homework.
Yeah, a little bit. For
those, wow, that whoever that is, that sounds awesome. I want to meet this guy.
You're kind of like, where is it? Who is this? Coming in?
I do resume services as well on the side.
Awesome.
For those that may not be familiar, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, I started my career really before I got into IT. I joined the military right after high school. Was in the new program there. Oh, thank you. My pleasure. So I spent a number of years in the military. I was in the nuclear power program. Whenever I got out, this internet thing was becoming popular towards the end of the 90s. I thought I'd try and capitalize on some of that. Started doing website design and website development. That led to a job in commercial real estate doing programming. Then that turned into database work, turned into project management, and then just over the years progressively found myself in more challenging roles. It's been a fun ride for the past 25 some odd years.
Oof. 25 years.
I can't even believe I can say that about anything, really.
And for you guys in the audience listening, a little bit of prep before we started going live. Chuck and I were talking about what razors do we use for our wonderful haircut here. So that was kind of fun. We don't use the same one, but we may try. I did pick up on the military thing. So again, thanks for your service. Can't say that enough. And I do know a little bit about the Navy nuke school because I was in the Navy. You must be really smart, Chuck.
Yeah. Well, there's being really smart, and then there's having really strong survival instincts. And I think failure is a great motivator. And at least for me it was. And so I was definitely surrounded by some incredibly intelligent people in the nuke program. And my desire to not get dropped was very strong. So thus the survival instinct kicks in, and that's just a long-winded way of me saying I held on as long as I could. It's a tough program.
Well, congrats for getting through it, because I know like 80% of the people or 70% do wash out. So congrats to you. What's like the biggest takeaway? I know it's like and does it relate to stuff that you're doing now in IT? Is there anything that you took from that, being able to survive in that, and then anything that correlates to surviving in IT for 25 years and reaching the apex in the chief information officer level? Anything that correlates that maybe our audience can take away from?
I think probably one of my biggest takeaways from the military, besides just the relationships and the friendships that I made, was that I learned quickly that I'm capable of a lot more than I give myself credit for. And one of the great things about the military, and you know this, Eric, I mean, just even going through boot camp, the first thing they do is they break you down to the point where you just feel like you're completely worthless, but then they build you back up and they put you in these scenarios where, you start to build a lot more confidence and you start to realize, hey, I can do this or I can do that. And so I think translating that into, my professional life, I've learned that when I find myself in a situation that's like, yeah, no, I can't do that, or no, I can't do this, I kind of have to stop and ask myself, okay, well, wait a minute. I think maybe I can do this. And so, I've pushed myself, to learn a lot, to try and get through scenarios and sometimes different ways. But I think building a lot of self-confidence, building a lot of, I think a lot of clout around having your own credibility, a sense of credibility in yourself. I think that's probably one of my biggest takeaways from the military.
Yeah, and talking with you and knowing you a little bit, I know you don't think yourself as a mentor, but as you're building teams and you know what you went through to survive, nuke school is survival school, and then having to navigate to the top echelons of the IT organization. What do you when you see people struggling? I mean, do you help them out? Because I've been there. I know what you're going through. Or I know you're kind of a funny guy. I mean, is it humor? How do you get people to be able to get through the tough times like you've had to do many times?
I think at the end of the day, we have to stop and realize that, no matter what job you're in, it's a people and relationship business, no matter what. And,
totally agree.
When it comes to leading people, I don't really, like I said before, I don't really look at myself as this leader, but I look at myself as somebody who's probably been in a similar situation and connecting with the people that you work with in a way where if somebody finds himself in a situation like, this isn't working, sometimes it's best, at least the way I look at it, is stop, let's sit down, let's just have a conversation. Like, what's going on? What are your roadblocks? What are your challenges? Why do you think XYZ is not able to be accomplished? Challenge yourself, maybe think differently about that. But I think making it less about the job and more about the relationship and more about the personal satisfaction that you'll get if you do find a way through that particular situation. And if there's not a way, and I think one of the things that's really important to understand, and I think we don't think about this enough, is that sometimes failure is not a bad thing. And it's not, failure in a sense is not failing. It's, I think understanding what doesn't work, which
it's part of the process, is it not?
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, we're conditioned at a very young age. If you don't do good on your math exam in school, there's repercussions. You get a bad grade. You're not bolstered up. So we learn at a very young age that failure is bad, and we only celebrate success. And so, I think that starts to translate into how we view ourselves in a professional situation where we fear failure, we fear the unknown, and so and I've seen many people do this. They'll choose to put themselves in situations where they only want to do the things that they know they can succeed at. And so that limits, and at least in my opinion, I think that limits your ability to grow and expand in what you're doing.
That begs another question. Do you sometimes put your staff and your people in uncomfortable situations so they can fail or feel like they're going to and then work themselves out of it? I mean, do you cognitively do that or consciously do that? Or
so I never consciously put my team in a situation where I know they're
we are recording.
I'm never going to do that, but I will challenge my team. A great example, just years ago, back when we were, so I left my last company and then came back after a couple of years, and they were going through a big divestiture. So they were acquired by a large international company, and we had a lot of stuff that we had to do to kind of rebuild the environment as part of our transition services agreement. And part of that rebuilding of the environment is an email migration, a tenant migration, so there's a lot of things you have to go through and do that. We had, hundreds and hundreds of mailboxes that had to be moved. And we brought in, some people to help us, and we had our internal team working on it. And my goal was, I want to cut all the email over a single weekend. Like, okay. And they came back and they're like, well, you can't. When you're going from a Microsoft tenant to another Microsoft tenant, they throttle that bandwidth. So there's only so much we can do at a time.
Okay.
And so, right then and there, the team was like, look, this is going to take us 4 to 5 weeks to do. I'm like, well, why is it throttled? Have we reached out to Microsoft and say, hey, can you lift the throttle? Like, can you do this? And they're like, well, no, they won't do that.
So you don't believe in rules? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So I mean, let's challenge ourselves to try and think differently.
Yes.
And sure enough, we reached out to Microsoft. They're like, yeah, sure, we'll lift the throttle for 30 days, and we cut over on a weekend. And so, a lot of times it's challenging yourself to maybe think differently about the situation that you're in. And when you tell yourself, well, no, this is how it's done, or these are the limitations, you don't always have to accept that. There's always a way around it, a way through it, or maybe just thinking differently about the situation. So back to the
That's
original
a good story.
question.
That's a great story.
Yeah. Do I put my team in a situation where I know they can fail? No, but I do put them in a situation where, one, we as an organization can benefit from the results of whatever it is that they're doing. And two, hopefully they're going to be able to learn something through that exercise. Maybe learn something about the project, the process, or learn something about themselves. And I will say I've been very fortunate over the years to have just some amazing team members that have rolled up their sleeves and burned the candle at both ends in many occasions, working through all hours of the night, just to try and get to the finish line of whatever it is that we're doing. And so yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
So I interpret that as zooming out versus being in the weeds.
It helps sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and I find myself in the weeds quite often, as you guys probably both do. But zooming out, kind of to segue into a question that I have in the previous role that you had before where you are now, we had some conversations, obviously trying to partner up and help you with heavy merger acquisition activity associated with the previous place. Particularly focusing on integration technologies amidst kind of the overall innovation efforts that were going on simultaneously. How do you balance that kind of from a zooming out, looking at, okay, well, we got all this stuff going on over here, all the while we have the day-to-day fun stuff that we still have to put some effort into. How do you balance that need for the day-to-day, but also the massive integration efforts and how complex those can get, and what lessons did you learn about kind of ensuring those both were working?
Yeah, so multiple teams, one team. I mean, that sounds like a monumental undertaking.
It is. And by saying, how do I balance that, you're suggesting that there is actually a balance.
It's a good answer.
There's a lot of switching gears that has to happen. And I will say this, at my last organization, we went through very, very heavy acquisition mode. And we learned very early on in the process that there was no way we were going to be successful without having a dedicated team. And I mean, we did 17 plus acquisitions, within about a 2-year time frame. And so, and this is not all IT. I mean, this is, when you're doing an acquisition, there's HR integration, there's operational integration, there's payroll, there's finance and accounting, you've got the IT stack, obviously, that has to be looked at. But, you're right, there should be a balance between running the day-to-day, if you have a dedicated team to focus on the acquisition activities, and then you've got, really strategic projects. The problem is, like most organizations, those things are typically split across a lot of the same resources. And so it becomes very difficult to create that balance. And what we really ended up having to do is that, like I said, in the very beginning, we learned that we needed to come up with a dedicated team. But then two, we needed to come up with a repeatable process. And a repeatable process does a couple of things. So it helps to mitigate risk. So as you run into scenarios like, hey, we didn't think about that, let's add that to the run book. So the next one that we go through, we'll know to ask that. But two, it allows you to create a certain level of predictability about what you're going to have to go through when the next acquisition comes up or the next integration comes up. And then it helps you plan a little bit more to say, okay, hey, we've done this a few times. Based on the size, the scale, the scope of whatever this acquisition is, we know that it's going to take about this much time to do this, about this much time to do that. So because we went through it enough, we were able to start getting a frame of reference on the resource drain that's going to be required. And just knowing that information allows you then to work towards a balance a little bit. But I mean, it can be chaotic, and
so you were talking about building these repeatable processes. So you were like you were the father of AI and automation, maybe. Like you were building the first models of automation utilizing some of those repeatable AI things.
No.
Is that you?
No.
Are you Mr. AI?
No. When I say you have to build a repeatable process, I was part of a team, and a big part of the work that went into building that process was the people that we had dedicated to the integration team. And so, we had a dedicated integration manager. My responsibility was helping to drive the IT portions of that, but the IT portions of that are just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And so, when you're looking at HR onboarding, there's a whole bunch of things you have to look at. I mean, I-9s, you've got to look at, background checks. You've got to look at payrolls. There's just a payroll migration in and of itself is something that we had people dedicated for.
Yeah.
That was part of the repeatable process. And so, saying that I was a father, no, I was a family member. I was a family member. There was a lot of people involved in working through that, and I'm happy to have been a part of it. But the IT pieces in and of themselves, if you pull that Lego brick off the overall building, that kind of gets exploded out into a whole bunch of other little bitty things. And that's where we had, again, as I mentioned before, great people on my team that just were able to dig in and help work through that.
Here's a question that we get sometimes, or people ask us, in Carson and I's day job. I can assume in the integration projects, the merger and acquisitions that you've been going through with, and then having to manage the day-to-days, you were probably in meetings, double sat meetings, triple sat meetings. It's all about meetings now. Now that a lot of people are either working from home or hybrid, where a portion of it is working from home, it's just like you were saying before. It's like, it's Zoom and Teams all day long, and there's, Brady Bunch boxes everywhere. Do you have a secret on how you run effective meetings, or how you like meetings to be run, so that they're not draining the life out of you and you can actually do your job? And I know this may not be something we talked about before. I was just thinking, you seem like somebody that's pretty cool, and you run a really good ship. So do you have any advice on how to run effective meetings, or just have none at all?
I do know, one, it depends on who owns the meeting as to my perspective on how I'm going to interact with that. I will say, if I get invited to a meeting and there's more than about 8 or 9 people on there, I'm really going to question why I need to be in that meeting. The same
Eject.
could have been an email. It's like, is there some specific involvement, or do you just want me to be aware of what's going on? Because if it's just awareness, like, send me the recap. I don't need to sit through that. And I think one of the things that I also learned in going through a lot of these integrations, and you're right, it is meeting after meeting after meeting.
Yeah.
You've got diligence, you've got private equity meetings. I remember there was a point where we were going through 2 sides of diligence, where we're going through acquisitions at the same time as we're going through a potential sale event. So then you've got all of that along with the regular run the business thing. So you have to be very protective of your time, and to the point where, like, and I do this today, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I block out portions of my day to say this is time for me to be productive.
Yep.
Like, yep. I have work that has to be produced. I have things that I have to get together. And so, I think that protecting that is important. And at the same time, if I'm running a meeting, there's specific things that I want to get out of that meeting. And if I can get it done in 5 minutes, great, we're done. If it's going to take the full half hour, the full hour, as long as it's productive. But let's think about meetings for a second. What's really happening when you get on these calls, right? The first 5 to 7 minutes is like, hey, Bob, how was your weekend? Right. Oh, good. How was yours? Oh, well, no. Wife had me doing this. And so now you're holding everybody hostage.
Yep.
Especially if you have a lot of people on the call. And some people may be multitasking, like, okay, look, I'm busy. I got things going on. Like, what do you need me here for? So understanding the audience is important, understanding what you're trying to accomplish by getting everybody together, because you're asking people to dedicate their time towards something that you're trying to accomplish. And so there's so many meetings that I'll just decline. It's like, hey, I tell you right now, if I've got a lot going on and I'm optional on a meeting, I'm not going to join. You can't. So you've got to be protective of your time. And I think as we get older and as we get further in our careers, that's probably the most valuable commodity that we have, is our time.
Mhm.
And so we've got to protect that. We've got to make sure that, what we're spending our time doing is something that's going to help move the ball down the field. It's going to help, improve a situation, or is going to be productive in some way, shape, or form.
Sounds like if Chuck invited you to a meeting, your meetings are run so well that everybody accepts, because they know they're not going to be there the full 30 minutes or the full hour, and they're going to get time back, and it's going to be very efficient. That's what I'm guessing.
Well, I would love to think that, but again, I don't have this methodology on how I have to run an organization. Like I said before, it's about people. And so, yeah, I'm relatively new in the organization that I'm at right now. So no matter what, everybody's accepting my meeting. I'm like, okay, yep, accept. But, before, having been there a long time, having built really strong relationships with everybody on my team, if I send out a meeting request, if people don't feel like they need to be on there, or they feel like, hey, I can't, I've got something else I have to do, they felt comfortable enough to say, hey, I can't go and decline.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Or if I really, really need them there, then I'll work with them on trying to kind of organize that. But yeah, not every single meeting has to be run, in military fashion.
Yeah.
Because again, it also goes to building those relationships. But yeah.
Are you a proponent of an agenda being also included in said invite, just so people have an idea of what's going to be discussed?
I think that's important. I think it's important to give the people some context of what you're wanting their time for. And if it's open discussion, like, hey, there's 3 things that I want to talk about. Like in my IT leadership teams, it's, hey, we're going to go over announcements. I want to go through, any organizational communications that have come up. I want to talk about project updates. And then I want to go around the room and address, specific items and issues. And then, they kind of bring their things to the table. But if it's a meeting where there's a very specific problem that needs to be discussed, I will include that in there and say, okay, here's the context, here's the situation. These are the things that we need to figure out. And the goal of this meeting is to have this.
Yeah, so they can pregame it, and when they come there, they're going to have some potential solutions. Right? Yeah. That's perfect. That's
but there are some meetings where I'm like, hey guys, can we get together and have a quick chat about an office building move? Very open, very high level, and it's more brainstorming. And the agenda really is to brainstorm. And at that point, I probably won't put a full agenda in there. So, and again, this may be an unpopular opinion. I know Jeff Bezos has got some specific things that he does, and there's others that have specific things. But I think it depends on what I'm trying to accomplish from the meeting, who's involved, who's the audience, and how much time available that I have will determine how much structure that I want to put around that meeting. So I think same thing with projects too. I mean, when you're managing a project, the level of project management for whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish should really be determined by either the risk of the project or the size of the project.
Yeah.
And so not every single project needs to be wrapped into a rational, unified process. Documentation and process for the sake of documentation and process is not helpful. So again, it's a horrible answer, I know, but it depends. It depends on the situation.
If it's not moving the ball forward, why are we doing it? Right? I mean, yeah.
Like if I want to have a meeting about, hey guys, we're having a potluck next Wednesday, let's all get together. I'm not going to put an agenda in there.
No.
So,
well, and I think Bezos's role is no more than, I think, no more people than it takes to eat a large pizza or something along those lines, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I think, and he was it him or Elon Musk said something about, hey, everything should be a memo. Everybody read the memo before the meeting. and then when you get there, and, again, depending on the number of people that are involved, like I don't want to sit here and, okay, if I've got a meeting and I've got, 6 vice presidents in the room, that's a very expensive meeting. So I want to maximize the time of that meeting and make sure, hey, come prepared, read the information. That all makes sense. And let's have a conversation about moving the ball down the field, to your point, versus, okay, the first half of the meeting is me reading the memo to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
we can all read.
Yeah. And I get that. But again, it depends. Depends on what you're trying to meet about.
So just to kind of shift gears, and I know this is somewhat herky jerky, but I know it's something that's somewhat near and dear to your heart, only because you've been through it maybe once, twice, who knows. Ransomware, right? We keep hearing more and more. Most recently, there was a rather large one.
Change Healthcare, yeah.
Change Healthcare. That was a big one. That was a pretty penny, obviously. I was actually surprised on how much it cost, but not really once you factor in what that data is worth. As far as ransomware events, challenges of managing third-party risk, especially vendors, what strategies do you or have you kind of put in place or kept near and dear as you've gone through those situations?
That is a broad.
Very much so. It's a broad brush.
As it relates to ransomware per se, I mean, let's just call it cyber to include everything. I think having been through one myself and having survived one myself, I learned a lot about how to handle those situations. I learned a lot about how to protect yourself against those situations. But I think one of the big things that I took away from that, and that I still kind of hold near and dear to my heart, is you're never going to prevent them. You're never going to prevent these things from happening, because as hard as you're fighting to put those castle walls up, there's 10 times more people fighting to try and get through.
Yep.
And so the things that, obviously you've got to make sure you've got strong defenses, but you really got to make sure that you're focused on the really important things, which is identification, isolation, containment, and remediation. And the faster you can do those things, I mean, if somebody ends up able to get through, and if you're able to identify it within a few seconds, isolate it and contain it within a couple of minutes, and then remediate it, hopefully within, a brief amount of time, then you're a much more resilient environment. Now,
are there drills that you go through? I mean, I'm just thinking back Navy days, how many drills and how many preventive maintenance things that we would drill on, right? In case something happened. Is that something that you employed at your organization?
So we would, it wasn't so much drills, but I know exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But it was more, how, if we think about recoverability and we think about the part of how quickly can we restore images, how quickly can we restore databases, and it's really the RTO portion of.
How quickly can we get the executives back up?
Yeah. No, exactly. It's like, oh, no, hey, the company's down, but your email's working. You should be okay. But no, in all seriousness, I mean, it's about understanding, and practicing, so that when the situation does arise, and hopefully it doesn't, it's just like running a drill.
Yep.
But as far as the identification and the isolation and containment, we third-partied out with the company to do all of our EDR and security operations monitoring, and so we really relied heavily on those guys to go through. And we looked at a number of tools, we looked at a number of services, and we found one that these guys were fantastic. They showed us demos, and so you have to give up a certain amount of oversight to your environment to, somebody who's got the tools and the staff and the resources and everything to be able to give you that kind of risk mitigation. Yeah. Because nobody's going to build that internally. You just can't.
Yeah. It's cost too much.
Yeah. So I think in doing that, though, that is definitely helpful, and they do have their own drills and everything that they run. But the other things that we do think about, or at least that I think about in the environments that I've been in, again, every environment's different, every scenario is different. But for us, at least the way I've looked at it is, vulnerability management is obviously key. Endpoint detection and response is key. There's all these tools that help do things, but at the end of the day, it's not the threat actor sitting in a coffee shop, often some far off country that I'm worried about as much as I'm worried about Peggy in accounting.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
coming in and being
Somebody
like,
clicked
oh,
something.
I took my laptop home and I loaded up a game on there or something completely on accident.
It was a pretty button that I clicked. I don't know what it was for, but I clicked it.
They said if I clicked it, I could save money on my car insurance, just something like that. But it's
so
those
there's a training
things.
component in this.
There's a training. Absolutely. It's end user education. That's probably one of the biggest defenses I think that we as organizations have is one, just being aware, and then knowing what to do. And, I remember when we rolled out a platform at my last company for phishing campaigns and training and everything like that. And, initially, it did really well, but then it got to the point where, after the event that we had, everybody was a heightened level of paranoia.
Yeah.
And so there would be legit emails that would come through that'd be like, whoa, let's send this off to IT. Which you know what, I'm okay with. I'm okay with that.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's end user education is a big piece of it. But there's always going to be tools out there. But if you're really looking at creating a program around cybersecurity, you have to constantly be second guessing what you have in place, because everybody's heard of 0-day threats. Well, nothing's a threat until it's exploited and found out. And so, you constantly have to get ahead of that. And so it's a constant cat and mouse game.
I'll just put a plug in for those of you that are listening. Hire military people, because typically they've gone through this stuff. They know how to keep doing this, right? You're always looking around, heads on a swivel. Even though you feel secure, something bad could happen. So let's prepare for that. But
Sure.
Man, Carson, I don't know if we're coming up on it, but I just love. I could sit here and talk to you all day long, Chuck. So I don't have any other questions to go through. I mean, I know somebody mentioned pizza. What's your favorite pizza?
Oh man, I'm a meat lovers kind of guy. Meat lovers with lots of onions and mushrooms. And believe it or not, I know it's unpopular, but I do like the occasional kind of pineapple and chicken.
Oh yeah, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
Like that.
Okay. Yeah, big Supreme guy myself. In anything and everything you can throw on there, as long as when you pick it up, it just doesn't completely crater. Which then goes back to are you really good at making a pizza? Because the crust is key.
Yeah, but if it craters, then you just got to fold it and you got to two-hand it.
No, I know, but I'm talking like even if you do crimp it, like you fold the crust, if it's too in the middle.
Blah.
You got to say extra crispy, brother.
Well,
I like
I'm a big fan of fire oven. Thin crust fire oven.
Yeah.
Those are awesome. But
for sure.
But no, I know we're running up here on time, Chuck. We want to let you get back to doing what you do, doing very well. We do appreciate the time. Hopefully there's a part 2, which I think we would all be very much interested in doing. But definitely wanted to thank you for your time, and let's do this again soon.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank
I appreciate
you very much,
it.
Chuck.
Appreciate you, man. Have a good one.
You too.
Take care, y'all.